Okay, so this video is going to be showing you the answers to the Chapter 2 study guide, and we're going to review the solutions. So here are the answers. Go ahead and pause this so that you can check all your answers. And here's the rest of the answers. If you need to pause it again, go ahead. So number 1, we had 1/4, and it wants us to write this as a percent. And so we actually have two methods that we've learned on how to go from 1/4 to percent, or from fraction to percent. In this case, one of the methods that we can use is percent, which means the equivalent fraction or equivalent ratio, where we make this a per cent per 100. Percent. And so to go from 1 to 4, or sorry, from 4 to 100, we're going to multiply times 25, and what we do the bottom, we do the top, and so we do 1 times 25, which is 25, and we have 25%, which means our answer is 25%, written with a percentage sign. The other method that we had learned was going with fraction to decimal and then going decimal to percent. So we could write our 1/4 as a decimal, and one method that we learned to do that was top dog in the doghouse, where we would put the 1, because it's on the top, inside the box, and then divide that by 4. We'd have to, of course, add a decimal and a 0, shoot our decimals straight up, and we do 4 goes into 10 2 times. We get the remainder of 2, so we need to add another 0 and drop it down. 40 goes into 20 5 times. And there's our 20 with our 0 remainder, so we're done. Then you take your decimal and you change it to a percent. And the way that we did that was by going to the right. That's our dipper, D to P to R, to the right, to the right, to the right, and then add in your percent sign. So again, our answer is 25%. Number 2 had 8.7%, and it would like you to write it as a decimal. So we need to take our decimal, and we're going to use pedal percent to decimal and move it to the left, always 2 places, and ditch the sign. Now right now we've got a space here between the decimal and the 8, and we need to fill that in with our 0. So our final answer is going to be 0.087, and that is how we write 8.7% as a decimal. For finding 32% of 60, this is just a basic multiplication problem. The first thing we need to do is change our percent into a decimal. So we move it to the left, and then ditch the sign. So we have 0.32 times, because remember that of means multiplication, times 60. So 0.32 times 60. We're going to do 0 times 2, which is 0. Then 0 times 3, which is 0. And 0 times 0, which is 0. Then don't forget that we need to indent 1. And so for 6 times 2, we're going to get our 12 and put the 2 underneath where the 6 is and carry our 1 over. Then 6 times 3 is 18 plus 1 is 19. Carry the 1 over. 6 times 0 is 0 plus 1 is 1. Then we're going to add up this. That's why we want to make sure that we line everything up nicely and that we indented. Now we count the amount of zeros that there are, or sorry, the amount of decimal place values that there are. There's 2 here. There's 0 here, so 2 altogether. So I'm going to move my decimal to the left 2 times, because there's 2 place values in 32 and none of them in 60. And so 2 times we go over, and we get answer is 19.2 or 19.20, which they're both the same. Okay, now we have 20% of 141, and I really like this example because it gives me the opportunity to remind you that we can find 10% of a number very easily. Remember that when we find 10% of any number, that we're just moving the decimal over to the left 1 place. So if I find 10% of 141, that's going to be 14.1 because I just take that decimal and move it to the left one place. Now that I know that this is 20%, what that means for me is that I'm going to take my 10%, which is 14.1, and I'm going to multiply it times 2. So 2, and then I'm going to take one decimal is all I'm going to move, my answer. So 28.2 is my answer. So that was one method that we could use using the 10% rule, which again I told you was my fast mental math method that I would use in the stores or when I tip all the time. Now the other method we talked about already was that you can change the percent to a decimal by moving the decimal to the left and ditching the sign. So we would have 0.20 or 0.2 and multiply that times 141. And we'll just multiply our decimals here. So we've got 2 times 1 is 2, 2 times 4 is 8, 2 times 1 is 2. Then we count our decimal places. We have 0 here, 1 here, so 1 altogether. And again, our answer is 28.2. All right, so either way, we should be at 28.2 or 28.20 is fine as well. But I like using the 10% method. I think that's pretty fast. Alright, now for number 5, this is an example from 2.8 that we just did. It's 16 is 20% of what number? And there were 2 different methods that you learned for this one, so I'm going to show both of them. Okay, the first method that we'll talk about is the double bar diagram. So we set up one number line that has 0 to 100%, and then the other one's going to be 0 to question mark, because that's what we're trying to find out. This right here is going to be the 100% of it. Now, because my percent was 20%, I know that I'm going to skip count by 20s. 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. So 20, 40, 60, 80, and these are all percents. So I've got 0 to 20 to 40, 60, 80, 100. So that's skip counting perfectly. So that's using the 20%. Now, it said that 20% is 16, so directly under here, I need to have the same amount of places, and right underneath the 20% is going to be 16, because that's what they gave us. Now, right now all I know is 0 and 16. What I want to know is this number right here, so I need to start skip counting on my number line. To go from 0 to 16, which is my next line, I went 16 places. So I'm going to skip another 16 places and make this 32. I'm going to skip another 16 places and make this 48. I'm going to skip another 16 places and make this 64. Nope, sorry. 64, sorry. And then another 16 places and make this 70. And so, 80. And so what I find is that my 100% is 80. And the way you can check your work is by doing 80 times 0.2 for 20%. And when I figure this out, it should end up telling me that I have 16, which is here. So sure enough, 80 is the correct answer for number 5. The other method that we learned here was the percent proportion. So percent proportions are where we set up 2 percents here, and we're going to try and see if we can make them equivalent to each other. So the first one I have is my 20%. If I write that as a fraction, one way I can write that is 20 over 100 for my 20%. If you'd like to simplify that to make it an easier number to work with, we could simplify by dividing top and bottom by 10 and making it 2/10. And the reason I'm going to do that is because if I originally kept this, 16 is part of the whole, and so this is the number that we're looking for. I can't go from 20 to 16 easily, but if I simplify this to 2, I can definitely go from 2 to 16 easily. And so how do I go from 2 to 16? That's going to be times 8. And what I do to the top, I'm going to do to the bottom, and so I'm going to do 10 times 8, which is 80, and so again, my answer is 80. So I think this one, it's all about how you grasp your equivalent fractions. I think that's the really important part here. All right, now we have the word problem. Fred completed 10 math problems. This is 40% of the number of math problems he has to do. How many math problems must he do? So 10 is 40% of how much? That's the question that we're going to need to ask ourselves. So again, I just showed you the two different methods. I really prefer using the proportion method whenever it's convenient. So I'm going to go ahead and start setting this up using the proportion method. I've got my 40%. So I'd write it as 40 over 100 as a fraction. Of course, I can simplify it, but at this point I can see that I'm going to go from 40 to 10, and I can do that easily, so I'm not going to mess around with my 40. I know that I'm going to divide by 4 to go from 40 to 10. So what I do the top, I'm going to do the bottom, and I'm going to do 100 divided by 4, which is 25, and look how easy that was. The answer is 25. Number 7, the directions say write the percent as a decimal and a fraction in simplest form. So 346%, I'm going to go from percent to decimal, and we've talked about pedal before. I'm going to take the decimal, it's a hidden decimal right here at the end of the whole number. I'm going to move it to the left, and ditch the sign. So it's 3.46. That's our decimal form. That's pretty easy. And once I have this, I find it even easier to find the fraction, because now I can just do my lollipop, and I know it's going to be 3 46/100. Now, it said simplest form, so I need to simplify my 26 and my 100. They're both even numbers, so I'm going to automatically divide them by 2 just to get them to be smaller. Maybe I'll need to keep going, maybe not. And I'll get 23 over 50. At this point, I see that I've got the right answer, so I'm done. So my answers are 3.46 for my decimal and 3 23/50 for my fraction. Now number 8, again, we're doing the decimal and the percent, so I'm going to do my pedal to the left. I took my decimal right here and I moved it 2 places to the left. I need to fill the space in with a 0, ditch my sign, and so the decimal form is 0.018. 0.018. Now I'm going to do my lollipop and add my zeros underneath my decimal, and so I get 18 thousandths. Again, these are both even numbers. I know that I can simplify at least by dividing by 2. So if I do that, I end up with 9 over 500, and there's my final answer. So my answers are 0.018 and 9 over 500. Number 9, 70% of 300. I talked already about the 10% rule. I'm going to use the 10% rule on this one, and then I'll use the multiplication with decimals on the next one. So the 10% rule here, 10% of 300. I move that 0, some say drop the last 0 off. Really, I like to think of it as move the decimal to the left 1 time. But I'm going to have 30 as 10%. Now, if I really want to know what 70% is, then I'm going to have to multiply my 10% value times 7 to make 70. Sorry, you guys know that's my phone. So I'm going to multiply times 7, and so I get 210. And so 70% of 300 is 210. And that should make sense. That sounds right. It's more than half, so it sounds good. Number 10, 30% of, sorry, I left out the of there, 90. For this one, I'm going to go ahead and do the multiplication method that you guys have used in the past. So I'm going to make this into a decimal by going to the left and then ditching the sign. So I get 0.3 or 0.30, however you want to do it. Either way, our answers are going to be the same. I'm going to multiply that times 90, because of means multiplication. So do 0 times 0 is 0, 0 times 3 is 0, 0 times 0 is 0. Then I'm going to indent in one place, and I do 9 times 0, which is 0, and I'm lining up under the 9. Then 9 times 3 is 27, carry the 2, and then we get our 2. I'm going to add down Now, I need to count how many decimal places I have. I have 2 decimal places here, 0 here, so 2 altogether. To the left, I'm going to go 2 places this time. And so my answer is 27. And it makes sense that 30% of 90 would be 27 because half of 90 is 45 and 30% is less than half. So it makes sense. So that's where our estimating with percents of a number has come in handy, that I can check my work very quickly. So here's the quick review for your study guide that we did, that I sent home after class today. If you have any further questions, be prepared with them tomorrow in class because we're going to be taking that test. Thanks so much. See you at school.